Friends, welcome to today's webinar. I'm super excited to see you all here, and we are very blessed to have Reid Williams and Ronald Yaros joining us as our speakers today. And uh, good afternoon, good morning, good evening. I hope that we have friends from all over the globe to join this amazing webinar series, The Business of Journalism in the Age of AI. And this is a collaboration project between the Robert H. Smith School of Business at the University of Maryland and the Philip Merrill College of Journalism, also at the University of Maryland. And it's graciously sponsored by JP Morgan Chase and local news network. Before we dive in, I want to take 1 minute to introduce today's speaker. I'm going to start with Professor Ronald Yaros, who is Associate Professor and the Director of the Digital Engagement Lab at the Merrill College. Specifically, I want to give a shout out to Yaros' new book, The Digital Engagement Model, How to Capture and Keep Audience Attention. This is an amazing book which details an evidence-based framework for designing content that aligns engagement with real-world constraints and on attention. By the way, I study pricing of digital goods. I'm a professor. I'm an associate professor of marketing at the Smith School. So I know that the most valuable asset these days amongst all the consumers is their attention. Okay. So kudos to you, Ronald, for figuring out how to capitalize and monetize on that. All right. And we are also extremely lucky to have Reid Williams to join us today. And he's the co-founder and the secretary for the Local Journalism Foundation. And the objective of the Local Journalism Foundation is to reverse civil decline through storytelling and to diversify media in Southwest Michigan. In his role with the board, he's helping design and build the organization and its core programs, as well as raising funds, which I'm sure is extremely challenging and fun, developing partnerships and supervising operations. All right. Welcome, Reid, and thank you, Ronald, for doing this for all of us. And friends, I'm going to be the moderator today. Hopefully I won't need to talk much. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to be monitoring the chat function. And if you have any questions, feel free to type it up. And towards the end, we'll have 10 minutes or so that you can directly ask questions for our speakers. All right. And thank you. And we can kick off the events now. Okay. So Ronald, Reid, who would like to? Perfect.
Yeah, I'd like to start. Thank you very much. And thanks to both the business school and the College of Journalism to support this. Grab your phones. Here's something that you typically would not hear if you were in my class, I guess. But many times I still do use the phones when possible for interactivity. And there's a lot of interactivity in this webinar. So hopefully you won't fall asleep. And if you just go on your phone to menti.com and enter that code, you will be counted in many of our interactive responses during this webinar. It's not going to require you to create an account. It's not tracking you. It's just connecting to my what's called a Mentimeter presentation, which is a fancy word for PowerPoint. But I hope you are able to join us with that, because what I want to do is find out what our population is in this webinar. So on your phone, you would tell me, what sector do you represent? Is it journalism, technology, like AI programming, education, business, research, or something that's not listed there? And I would really like to know who I'm talking to, because obviously that is going to dictate how much emphasis I place on various aspects, because engagement is so broad. And obviously, we're talking in the context of journalism and news today. But to be honest with you, the digital engagement model is how people cognitively process information in this day and age with mobile devices and digital technology, and most recently, AI. So it's not like we changed the way we process information for just news. We have limited capacity in our brains to encounter certain content. Obviously, we are interested in certain things and our attention is directed to that, but it's much more complex than that. So thanks for those of you who did respond. Now, rank these in order on your phone of how concerned you are about digital communication. Is it the algorithms you're most concerned about? Is it the lack of trust in information online? Is it AI, technology in general? Is it audience attention? So what you do is you click and drag on your phone to be able to rank those. And so far, it looks like leading at the moment is audience attention. Hey, I hope that stays number one because that's exactly what we're going to talk about for the most part. However, there's always the question about to what extent do algorithms play a role in what we see? Of course, it's very obvious, but I would argue that your content and how you present it and how much engagement it generates obviously will influence the algorithm. So there's a connection there. Lack of trust, of course, misinformation is really important. And what we're going to do in the model I'm going to show you is actually give the opportunity for the user to instantly fact check whatever information they are going to be accessing. AI is ranked third, and then social media algorithms. Okay, great. Thank you for that. So this is what you're going to see. Today's audience is briefly we're going why getting and sustaining attention is the most important. Two types of interest in the digital engagement model. There are two types of interests. You may not know that, but educational psychology for several years of research has told us that. Live demos of the smart story structure and what we call adaptive AI. And results from testing the structure with a diverse audience of more than 3,000 people. I did not start this last year. This was my first Neiman Reports not study, but it was an article I wrote in 2008. It's really at that moment the way that I was motivated to look at how the next generation of news consumers was really using their mobile devices and what their needs were. And of course, it's changed since then, but that's what I've been following all along. And if you obviously tune into some of the latest digital data, like Oxford and Reuters reports, you know that is as of this year at least, 42% of the audience, according to their research internationally, avoids news. And at the lowest point now is our news trust. And that's the lowest since Reuters began tracking it a decade ago. And there are many passive users, which I hope to address with this webinar. They check in once a week or less, and it's continuing to climb, maybe at 16%, but it's still not very, very high. And then there's the apps and video influences on news sites. They're losing ground on news sites to social and video platforms. The bottom line is, in my opinion, none of this means people stopped caring about their communities. It means the format stopped matching how today's audiences seek, select, and consume information today. So, and also just as a sideline before I get into it, maybe you saw this week from Neiman Lab, how the New York Times is now looking at hiring local news reporters in all 50 states. So they recognize the importance of this information. If you could improve one thing for engagement on your phone, which one would you choose? Would it be, I want to really have more video? I would like to encourage more postings in order to have more engagement. I would like new presentations, how the structure of the content is presented, and more interactivity. I've got 10 of 34. I'll wait until we get about at least 20 people. All right. Thank you for your input. 61% of the people say more interactivity. Okay. So I'm going to argue that more interactivity is directly related to how the content is presented. And that will be the focus of our model. Now, in our lab, we had a senior journalism graduate this past spring, Olivia Borgala, who did an excellent job comparing the Baltimore Sun and the Baltimore Banner with Exactly 1,000, well, more than 1,000 TikToks analyzed over a 3-year period ending in December of 2025 in the exact same competitive news environment. So it's fairly local here, at least to me, the Baltimore Sun and the Baltimore Banner. But how did that compare? She found that interactivity wins. So those of you who did select interactivity, good for you. You get extra points today. But the Baltimore Banner actually really won because of the number of likes and comments. And the Baltimore Sun had far more saves. Informational content was largely one directional, including articles translated into video. But for whatever reason, there were more saves and less interactivity on the Baltimore Sun. So for newsroom managers, posting more, according to Olivia's research, did not indicate that it got more views. Just posting more often obviously would make that particular posting more viewable. But overall, as a strategy, it did not end up adding up to more views. So frequency showed a slight negative relationship with the views. Hashtags and view lengths had no measurable effect for either outlet. Of course, it's only just two outlets that Olivia did, but I just wanted to share, and I had her permission to share that research with you. It's not shrinking attention spans. And now, of course, if you are diagnosed with ADHD, autism, other neurodiverse type conditions, yes. But for the most part, for most of us, even though we go around saying we have shorter attention spans, Linda Stone, former IBM executive, now researcher, used a term that I adopted for the book, continuous partial attention. That means you're continuously thinking about or attending to devices from morning to night. It's not multitasking. Multitasking is trying to complete two tasks at the same time with 100% efficiency, which is, of course, impossible. But that's not what we do all day. And so this new mindset of people with their devices is what we're trying to address. We're not blaming short attention spans. Also, mainly because I can show you all of the metrics that show younger people spend hours, often more time than they want, on social media, on streaming video, on YouTube, on movies. So there isn't a short attention span for everything. It does suggest that content plays a role. So this webinar is not about replacing your long form content. It's not about supporting just scanners and readers. It is about supporting scanners and readers, and it's about recognizing everyone's time to engage because we find that is a critical variable in the extent to which people will engage, even if they're interested in the content. Maybe the meeting is about to start, the plane is about to board, and they're interested, but how can that content, especially in local news, immediately inform them? So we're rethinking engagement in a scrolling world. And I want to ask you now, which best describes the audience you would like to reach? If I said to you right now, I want you to post and extend to the audience an important thing that you have researched or that you studied or that you programmed, what best describes the audience you want to reach? Is it a target audience, the largest possible audience, social media users in particular, or mobile users? Interesting. Okay, so we have a target audience leading the way right now. And that is really interesting to see because obviously, like me, I mean, I'm no youngster, but in journalism, we were always taught to look at the target audience. Well, that's not the correct answer according to the model. The target audience, the traditional, unless you are specifically addressing a topic for a particular population, the rule is obviously when you're posting on social media, you have an incidental audience. You have people that are going to incidentally be exposed to your content, and they may not necessarily be interested. But the model is trying to show how people who may not typically seek or select that information, and information that's maybe not quite as sexy or entertaining, nanotechnology, climate change, health issues, younger people to some extent will pay attention, but not anywhere near, of course, entertainment and sports. So what about that incidental audience, which is really the largest possible audience? So I'm going to introduce to you four user variables. And what I want you to do right now on your phone is to tell me which two are ignored by traditional linear information. Is it their demographics? when we're writing linear information? Is it their interests? Is it their environment? Or is it their time? And I see we do have 11 people in the chat there, so I'll leave it up to the moderator to interrupt me if you want me to change anything or repeat something. Okay, so it looks like the majority say their environment and their time. Good job. Those are the two things that linear content, local, national, international, is not really, according to the model, taking into account. We argue that everyone brings more than just individual interest and demographics to any content. To any content, we call it the user diet. Yes, they're demographics. Yes, they're long-term interests. That's a no-brainer. That's the target audience. But also, whether it's a target audience or incidental audience, now we're talking about the environment, two different types of environments. Their physical environment, how distracted are they? How busy are they? Are they in the library or are they stopped at a red light? Uh, and how much time do they have to engage? Everyone, of course, brings to content a finite amount of time. So when I'm writing that whole long form text, am I thinking about the time that they have if they've got 15 or 20 seconds? Can I at least inform them with some information? So the digital engagement model, to put it together, is there's the diet on the left, there's the behavior of the audience, and there's the target audience, which is a no-brainer. Okay, so that's engagement. But what we want to do is we want to find out which do you think is the main reason why readers disengage with information. Do you think it's because they're not interested? Is it because it's not interactive? Is it because they don't have enough time? Or is it they don't trust the source? And this would be the main reason. Arguably, all four can contribute to some portion of the audience in terms of a specific reason why they would disengage. But what is the main interest or main reason? And it is that they're not interested according to, and thank you for your votes. This is really exciting to see. I agree. They're not interested. So instead of individual target audience interest, educational psychologists call it situational interest. What is generated only by the content in short term. It has nothing to do with the fact that you bring your favorite sports team or your favorite news organization or your favorite topic to the content. It's to what extent, when you are exposed to that content, does it make you just more interesting by the way it is presented? And that's the situational interest. The model says spice content does that. Scannable, personalized, interactive, which you voted for earlier, continued curiosity, which is the trick, because after that headline where we got their attention for whatever reason, in some cases it's clickbait. I don't like clickbait because it doesn't inform scanners. It just says, if you have the time, click on it to read it. So you're automatically losing a portion of that audience that would be interested and could be informed even with a few seconds of informative information. So those are the four things. And then emotion is the last. Of course, we can't always generate emotion with our content, but if we do, the research shows that it is an effective part of the spice content that generates information. And we do know people scan. This is a representation of our eye tracking research that shows that when people were exposed to, and we have several people who were exposed to this content, you can see the F pattern where people are spending in red most of their time fixating and reading the first sentences, and it slowly decreases as they go down the page. Probably not a surprise to you, but here's the empirical evidence of why scanners need to be accommodated. So let's go back to that model. And instead of just the target audience, I'm going to add the incidental audience, which needs situational interest generated by spice content. Again, this is content that a person would not typically seek or select, but for whatever reason, they're going to engage with it. Okay, when I go on TikTok, I'm not looking for a cute cat in a tutu dancing to a rap song, but I might definitely watch it for, 15 seconds, 20 seconds. That's the situational interest. Now, I'm not saying news needs to be entertaining, of course, but it needs to do more or could do more than just the linear inverted pyramid that we're used to. Now, when you open a long article, what do you do first? Do you typically, most of the time, start reading Do you scan or scroll first? Do you look at photos? Or do you decide if it's worth my time? Yeah, you got to keep that phone handy. I know I've lost some people, but I really do want to hear what everyone has to say. And of course, I can't spend too much time on this, but it definitely does give us some feedback. Decide if it's worth my time. Okay, so now we're talking about things like this is a 7-minute read. This is a 10-minute read. It's telling me how much time I'm supposed to devote to the content. Our theory is that divulging how much time it takes to consume that content may not be the best strategy. It's just give them the content that can be both short form and long form. And our model does that. We call it progressive disclosure. That is, people will select what they're interested in, and that will promote curiosity. It will support the scanners and it will build engagement. So the Smart Story Suite architecture starts with the base layer of core reporting, which is, of course, good journalism. That's the paramount tenet of journalism. But then we talk about informative headlines, concise takeaways, visual explanations, and then progressive disclosure. Now, I'm going to show you content that we exposed to 1,700 participants. They were randomly assigned to one of the two, either the traditional linear text, a one-size-fits-all linear story, or the adaptive smart story, which is a non-linear structure. Each participant can expand, skip, and follow what interests them. So this is what the story looked like on your typical web screen or on a mobile device. And so it's your standard predictable format, right? Headline, photo, maybe it's a video, and mainly text. If I ask you something specific from paragraph 2 right now, you would have to read, you would not know that I'm selecting paragraph 2, but if there's something really important in paragraph 2, you would start at the top and you would read until you could answer what I think you should answer, which happened to be embedded in paragraph 2. Here are the 22 measures that we used once we exposed the content to, in this case, it was about 800 participants, 800 to 900, about half of them. And you can see all of those measures. It gave me control over what I viewed. It quickly viewed what I wanted to view. It made the info more manageable. I got details without having to read all of it. Okay, and the dots there on a scale of 0 to 5 show where that linear news story ranked. So on the far right, there in the middle, you can see that it made the info manageable, which is interesting because it's just a linear page of text. Provided quick access to key information. Again, interesting. I'm not so sure I agree with that because, again, you'd have to take the time to read the whole thing. And it was useful even with less time. So, I mean, right there kind of goes against what we're trying to promote here, right? Well, there are several things in red that we're most concerned about. Offered quick fact checking, ranked very low, as you can see by the dot to the left of the scale. Was tailored to my choice, was more interesting than other news, drew me in deeper, made me want to obtain more details, blah, blah, blah. You can see in red all those things that did not score very high when it came to exposure to the linear story. And this is what the nonlinear story looks like. This is the Smart Story Suite in both of the screen view, and we're now experimenting with the mobile view. So even if you could post this on a mobile post, which would give people instant access to the headline. And again, some of you coming from other industries and health and science, this all applies too, because in this case, the study, the content was varied because we've now run this experiment more than once. And in this case, it happened to be state funding for public colleges varies widely across the US. So what I'm going to do is ask, first of all, if everyone can see my um, story here.
Yes.
Okay, good. There it is in live form. I can immediately see the sections that would typically be paragraphs Jet stream targets mid-Atlantic. Okay, I live in the mid-Atlantic. I'm really interested in that. And if I click on that, it's going to give me, again, not only the bullet points just for that section, but it won't overwhelm me with a page of text, and it will give me specific information visually. Maybe I want a 2-minute video. So it's going to give me the opportunity to look at the 2-minute video. Maybe I don't live in the Mid-Atlantic and I want to actually click on something in the map. I'm not going to do it because it would take the full screen. But when I click on it, it opens it up and allows me to click on all the different areas based on my personalized location and fact checking. It will allow me to instantly say, here's the claim in the article, here's the verification, and it's going to confirm whether or not it's an accurate thing. This was made by a human being. This is not AI. This is just to say that, okay, if you don't like AI, if you're still skeptical about hallucinations, the structure itself definitely does play a role in making sure that we can. Oops, how do I get back to my Zoom? Let me stop sharing for a moment. Okay, there we go. So what I'm going to do now is go on to the uh, Mentimeter. Okay, I guess I have to, sorry about that. Now you can see behind the scenes here how we are making these. And I think we're at the bottom, which is right there.
Perfect.
Okay, so we went through that. And here is again just a reminder of what the linear story scored. Here is with the I guess what is called orange dots to the far right of the scale. This was the average rating for those measures. And anything in green was statistically significant in terms of superiority over the linear structure. 21 of the 22 measures were statistically rated as being skipping the info I didn't want, quickly viewing what I wanted to view, made the info manageable, offered quick fact checking, provided quick access, was useful even with less time, drew me in deeper, made me want to obtain more, adapted to my. This is what progressive disclosure does. It builds the curiosity, it builds what we call attention momentum, because there's always something other than a full page of text to read, which if I have limited time, I'm not going to do. It just makes it a lot more interesting. And it's called situational interest. So even those people who rated low interest in education and the funding of education, they definitely rated that much higher in interest. And so if you were to coincide each of those measures with the model that we have made here in terms of spice content, you can see exactly what was being measured. So like in the middle, it says would inform even with distractions. Well, that was part of the environment. And you can see where the blue dot was for the linear and where the orange dot was in terms of average rating for the nonlinear. So I know this is radically different. I know you don't really find this anywhere yet. I argue, based on the research, and it will continue, is that there's an opportunity for all news, including local news, to really look at how maybe AI could do this. So we are also looking at not generative AI, because that, of course, can produce hallucinations. We're not looking at summative AI, because all that does is compress a long form content to short sentences. We are looking at adaptive AI, restructures vetted content, the same facts with reader controls for selective depth. So it restructures what already exists, but it does it according to our structural engagement model. So I'm going to use a new window here now, and I'm going to show you.
Ronald,
Yeah,
Ronald, if I may just interrupt for a second, there are a couple of questions which I think are really relevant.
good.
So I'm going to start backward with Christopher's question. Christopher said, it all sounds really good, But how much staff time would be needed to create the smart version of the stories? And how could small local sites sort of do that? It would be great if you can share with Christopher and the rest of the crew.
Thank you. Good questions. Can you see this now from the Capitol News Service?
Yes.
Okay. So I don't want to violate any copyright without permission. I'm going to use our own college site, Capitol News Service, and I'll explain in a moment how local people can do it. And as you can see, it's your linear text. It has the photo and
Mhm.
has the the headline. Now I'm going to take you to what we call the Smart Story prototype, and I'm going to plug in that exact same URL. So if you have limited time, if you have a small newsroom, if you really don't want to take a whole lot of time, the adaptive AI tool, and the reason why this is taking so much longer is because we are, again, it's a prototype. We are actually tracking everything it's doing to make sure it does not hallucinate, that it generates a bullet point list, that it generates a brief summary, that it separates the photos, and most importantly, that it now looks at that story and provides the user with selectable disclosure. So it took less than a minute. It showed us, of course, and if you want the detailed view, you could click on that. And yes, there is the story. It still is, the one if you like, you just love to scroll. But here's the summary view again, which means when I want to know, okay, USDA reorganization plan and facility conditions, there it is. It can just bring it up at the bottom that will specifically say, okay, you're interested in this part of that story. I'm going to immediately give it to you. And if you want to read the whole thing, great. That's long form. If you want to read just the research, relocation challenges, and legal objectives, that's your shorter form. It generated this content from 93% of the original story. What happened to the other 7%? It's not new information. It just looked at any redundancy. It looked at any possibility of condensing some sentences. It does check on grammar and spelling. And for whatever reason, 7% of that original story was not used. But everything here, as we tested it, is exactly what was presented in that original. If you want to look at the photo, you can click on that, and that allows us to and you could have several photos here, and it still will allow us to visualize the story. And we are now working on adding the fact-checking ability. So the adaptive AI will be able to look at fact-checking, and we're going to test the extent to which people might increase their perceived credibility of that information if they do have instant access to that fact-checking. So I know there's chat bots. I know there's generative AI. There's a lot of concerns of that in the newsroom. If you're interested in this and you think that this would expedite the production or perhaps even just guide the news that you're about to present, maybe you have a template that looks like this Smart Story Suite. You could immediately process that information using this tool and then plug it into that tool. Or you could use it directly. But we are not going to make this available to the public because we uh, we want a copyright ownership to be honored, and we'll probably license it and a nominal fee to any organization. It could be any organization, news included, that would like to do it. Now, there's also extensive research being done in education right now. I mentioned neurodiversity, and I've got some really good partners that are looking at to the extent to which students who have different ways of processing information would be able to look at this. Would it generate more interest to them? Would they learn more? Do I have any other related questions out of that chat that I need to answer?
Uh, so we have a couple of different questions, but I also want to be mindful of time so that Reid can finish up the part of his presentation. So what I'm gonna do is that uh, I'm just gonna ask one more question, and towards the end we can go back and maybe let some of the other questions resurface.
Good. I'm almost done.
Okay, great. So, Ronald, uh, it would be great if you can answer the following question within a minute.
Okay.
This is from Chris. If the original CNS story included a lot of subheads, would the suite have put those sections on the left navigation bar in the same order? This
In
is
the
a,
same order? That's a good
yeah.
question. I never checked order. All we do with Python is to say, along with making sure, I mean, there are 65 different specific things I asked in this particular model, and it does not currently indicate that subheads would be placed in order, but that's a good thing for us to add if that's important. I do not know how the adaptive AI decides what goes at the top and toward the bottom. I'm going to assume it's chronological in terms of how the extent to which it appears in the story, and that would dictate the order. But I'm going to check that out. That's a good question. Thank you.
Okay,
So,
then very, very quickly.
yeah.
I know we're a little behind, but just very quickly. And the answer hopefully is just a yes or no, which is from Dwayne. How do ad blockers work with this? Dwayne says, I'm not seeing any ads. Is that
Oh,
a deliberate?
oh,
Right.
yeah, good. Well, it's not a yes or no question. It's that the next step is for us to place an ad on each of those selectable pages, and for those who need ads. And that would basically say we're not going to overwhelm people with pop-up ads and other things that I don't think the ad blocker would stop it, AI, from displaying it on the right-hand side. But again, I'm making notes. These are good questions. There's always more questions to pursue. So
We have
thank
a
you for that.
set of amazing questions. Unfortunately, I have to, I have to revisit them later. Okay,
Yes.
I want you to be able to wrap up, and then we
Yeah, this
can.
is wrapping up. What this means is you want to build attention momentum, informing headlines followed by more than just a photo or video and linear text. You want to replace clickbait. Put your most important info, and it includes video on social media. You have 3 seconds, according to the research, to immediately generate situational interest. Yes, we want to tell stories in a linear way. We want to start at the beginning and we want to make it interesting at the end. And many people do that. But those who understand attention on social media know the first 3 seconds with video, with something interesting visually, with a text that explains something immediately, really does do the best job of building attention momentum. And then finally, it is nudging. Don't just offer, but add those visible cues, informative subheads like the CNS story did. That's really good. Informative subheads does not mean titles. Titles don't tell me anything other than what I'm going to learn by reading those paragraphs. Explanatory subheads would be declarative sentences that a scanner who scrolls down the screen would still be able to learn something hopefully useful. So it's all about protecting the craft. We're not trying to change journalism. We're trying to change how it is structured. And so, if you are interested in working with us, you can copy down that URL because that would give you the opportunity to contact us, tell us what your needs are. There's no charge because my student team is eager to work to continue to improve this. We have an interdisciplinary team of programmers, journalism, psychology, communications, information science, human-computer interaction folks. It's very exciting, and if you are interested in that, please do. So I'm going to now pass it on to our esteemed friend and guest, Reid Williams. Just to mention, he's a former senior director, storytelling studio at the Today Network. But most importantly, he's now with the local Journalism Foundation, which is an important organization. I want him to briefly discuss and his reactions.
Thanks, Ron. Should I just jump in, Bobby? I didn't know if you needed to
No,
add
go
in.
ahead. Please
Okay.
jump right in. Thank you,
Yeah.
Ron. That was amazing.
Yeah, I am just in awe, Ron. And that's even though I had got an advance, look at the book and everything like that. I hope you're gonna plug the book because if people are as half as intrigued as I am looking at your presentation, they're going to want to read it and apply what you've got in there. I'll also add before I talk a little bit about myself. I met Ron first 10 years ago. I was trying to figure this out, Ron, and I think it was 10 years ago this year that we first met when I was with Gannett, which is now the USA Today company. And Ron has been at the University of Maryland the whole time. And over that time of, from 10 years ago for the 7 years, 8 years that followed, uh, I went through a number of different roles with Gannett, and Ron was somebody I turned to and sought advice from and collaborated with in each of those roles. And so I have kind of had a perch to the evolution of all of these ideas, and it's just fantastic. And I think what you've put together is it's groundbreaking, really, and I think it's useful for people. So
Thank you.
let me talk about myself a little bit. As Ron and Bobby mentioned, I am a co-founder of the Local Journalism Foundation, which is a local 501(c)(3) based in Kalamazoo, Michigan, where I'm speaking to you from today. The Local Journalism Foundation, myself and a couple co-conspirators, we created it because we saw what was happening in our community and is happening all across the United States, which is just the decimation of the local news ecosystem. I have a vested interest. I'm biased. I am a journalist. But I was also living in a community where I just felt like there wasn't enough quality information available. I'm a parent. At the time, I decided to do something about local news in my community. I had a daughter who was just entering the school system, and there just wasn't enough information as far as I was concerned. So we created the Local Journalism Foundation. One of its three core purposes is to operate a community news service, which is known as Now Kalamazoo. And we publish an email newsletter as the primary publishing vehicle, our primary product. It publishes Monday through Friday. We do have a website, but it's mostly an archive of the newsletter and our community things to do events calendar. And we are I would like to say a kind of a lab in practice, incorporating a lot of what Ron has shown through research over the years. And we are very much interested in trying to grow people's engagement. And I probably don't have to tell people in the audience here today that there are some significant challenges there. And Ron has talked about a number of them. Trust, and then whether or not people think what you're offering is really worth their time. And so at the Local Journalism Foundation with Now Kalamazoo, we are very intentionally trying to do some different things. We saw the creation of a new media organization as an opportunity to question the way everything had ever been done and to ask, okay, is this actually helpful? Is this what people are looking for? And do we really need to build a publishing operation, a news service, or a business in the way that it's been done in the past? So I mentioned being email first as a publisher. That came out of that line of thinking and reasoning. We also do a lot of other things. We view what we offer as a service as opposed to a product. So we are not focused on trying to just put out a newsletter every day, or how many stories can we put on a website, or how many social posts can we create. We're genuinely asking, what does the community need to know? And that might be because they're explicitly asking us questions about something, or because we are looking at what we like to call indicators of community well-being. And so trust is a big one of those things, but it's not just do people trust their local media? It's do they trust their neighbors? Do they trust their employer? Do they entrust the other institutions, whether it's local government or law enforcement? We're also looking at things about their awareness of certain issues. So, do they even know about the pollution levels in the river? Do they even know about the graduation rate of the high school that they maybe their kids go to? And so, our work, our journalism, is actually focused on meeting those needs, those information needs, and driving some sort of impact on those indicators of community well-being. This fall, I'm actually going to begin a Knight Wallace Fellowship. If you're not familiar with that, it's a fellowship program at the University of Michigan. It is for journalists, for working journalists who sort of take a brief sabbatical from their career to study, to grow, and perhaps even focus on a project. And so for the next academic year, I'm actually going to be diving into what I call the demand side of journalism. And for a lot of my career, all that time that I spent collaborating with Ron, I was definitely thinking a lot about what I call the supply side of journalism. And that is making new products, coming up with new formats, telling different stories, telling more stories. How do we produce more? And I have kind of arrived at a point working in local journalism where I'm beginning to see the limits of doing that. Because even though we're producing as a field, as an industry, we're producing more news than's ever been published before. And there is more information out there, more sources of information for people, and yet we still see trust going down. We still see subscriptions or revenue or any kind of measure like that. We see that going down. We see the number of journalists going down. We see the number of publications going down. And so my hypothesis is that while all of these things are important that we've been focusing on the supply side, they're not sufficient enough to kind of reverse what the field has experienced. And we need to ask, where is the demand coming from? And why does there seem to be less demand for news? Why do people feel like they can go about their lives, whether that's personally or professionally, and they don't need to subscribe to a news source? They don't need to make that a part of any of their lifestyle habits. And they feel like they're getting what they need, whether that information is vetted and high quality, whether or not it was produced by a robot or AI or someone qualified to do journalistic work. What are the social factors or the other environmental conditions that might be influencing whether or not there's demand for the type of news and information services that journalists like my colleagues are producing? So that's what I'm going to spend the next 10 months or so really digging into. It's been kind of a side project for the last 9 months. But that's a little bit about myself. One of the things that we focus on at Now Kalamazoo that I think kind of brings us around to an intersection with Ron's research is when we started Now Kalamazoo, I mentioned, not doing anything the way it's been done just because that's the way it's always been done. One of the things that my colleagues and I felt pretty strongly about is that news doesn't do enough to be useful to people. And by that, I mean news has a way of emotionally stimulating people. It motivates them to feel something, and it often motivates us to do something. And if we don't give people an outlet for that or a way to apply that motivation and that energy, that is actually long term counterproductive to our goals for building a loyal audience. And what I mean by that is if people get frustrated, if they get angered, or even when they get inspired, but there's no way to channel that feeling, that is actually going to be dissatisfying to them. And to some people, for in the case of the bad news, the stuff that really upsets us, it's going to be a big turnoff. And my theory is that is a major source of news avoidance, right? People feeling those emotions without an effective way of resolving those emotions, and therefore you're going to avoid in the future that thing that makes you feel that way. So one of the things that we started immediately focusing on is what can people do with this information? And this has actually been done for a long time for travel type stories in the news world. There was always an if you go box would tell you the hours that a business was open or the address of how to get to that park that the news feature was about. It would help you act on that information. And so we've said, well, we need to be doing that for all our different types of news and all the different information that we might provide to people. So we do a couple things at the Local Journalism Foundation. Now Kalamazoo expends probably 50% of its effort producing guides and tools for people. So when we are writing about certain issues in our community, In addition to producing more traditional articles, we're asking what's like the long-term useful tool guide, is it could be interactive, it could be written, it could be visual. What's the thing we can give people that's going to allow them to take that motivation that the article gives them and actually put it to use, to actually have some kind of application in their lives, to make their lives better, save them money, save them time, bring them closer to their family, all these different kinds of use cases. And as I said, my thinking now has evolved to grow beyond just that utility factor, which I sort of see on the tail end of experiencing news, to start thinking about that what I call the ignition moment, right? What comes before they go seeking news that actually is increasing their motivation or likelihood of seeking out news in the first place. So as I said, I think there's definitely some overlap in what Ron was talking about in terms of what you need to do to serve people once you get that opportunity, right, to hold their attention and to serve their needs. And what I was just talking about with sort of what gets you that curiosity in the first place and where you send them after you've given them a Smart Story Suite experience. So I know we're pushing time limits, Bobby. I think I talked enough there, and I'd love to get back to some questions.
Thank you, Reid.
Thank you, Reid. Obviously the audience have been super engaged. They have a lot of questions. Uh, Let me see if we can go through the entire list. Let me start with Karina's question, a clarification question. What was the term about staggered disclosure?
It's progressive disclosure, which means that you are looking for things of interest to you, just like you would in any medium, including social media. You're scrolling and looking for something of interest to you. Well, now if we make that visible in a news story, particularly a long form one, it gives the opportunity for people to pick maybe just a small part if that's what they want, or the long form too if they want. So we're not getting rid of long form journalism, but it's called progressive disclosure.
Got it, got it. Hopefully, Karina, this answered your question. And uh, sorry, there are so many questions, and then let me
That's
see.
a good thing.
It totally is. It totally is. Okay, now I have a similar question, but I'm gonna, just speak out the exact the original wording of the question because I study pricing, so I care about prices. So the question from Jao Irani is that for adaptive AI, what's the average token usage and the optimal models you select? Wow.
Minuscule. It's very small. It's a few cents every time we hit that server uh, to execute the code. So it isn't much.
Okay. Uh, Okay, I think I've done that. Some audience are asking me to post the sites that you're affiliated with, Reid and Ron. I did that in the chat box. Okay, for Ron, another question from Jeffrey is that regarding attention spans becoming shorter versus continuous partial attention, is the latter, which means continuous partial attention, implying today's viewers are more fastidious or simply craving the consistent feeding of information?
They are constantly thinking about the device, the fear of missing out. What is on social media, what's going on in my sports team. As long as the device is available, here's a real quick explanation of an experiment. They divided a class of students into three groups. One taking a quiz with the phone on the desk, another one taking a quiz with the phone in their backpack, and a third one taking the same quiz with their phone in another room. And they found that the closer the phone got, even though it was off, the closer the phone was, the worse they performed on their quiz. So that's the
Hmm.
continuous discussion. in their minds of, okay, I'm doing this. It takes but just a few seconds to think, what am I missing? It's the same thing you do at, at the red light. It's the same thing when you're waiting for the dentist to call you into the office. Check your phone. You see it every day, everywhere. So that's the continuous partial attention.
Awesome. And this question is for Reid from Chris. Reid, could you please tell us the ballpark, what financial investment was needed to launch Kalamazoo now? If you remember the ballpark, right? It doesn't have to be
Yeah.
super precise. And did you have a number of folks invest into the site?
Yeah. So I guess the first thing to point out is there has definitely been investment, but the local journalism foundation is a 501(c)(3) nonprofit. So when we say invest, what we're saying is donate.
I see.
Um, but to answer the heart of the question, there is no straight line story here. One of my colleagues and co-founders of the local journalism foundation, he actually started Now Kalamazoo as a pop-up magazine. It was a single magazine published entirely dedicated to covering some issues about homelessness in our community, and that published in November 2019. And his original plan was to keep diving into homelessness issue. We have a pretty acute problem with it here. And but then 2020, we all know what happened. Pandemic entirely changed those plans. Going to do a bunch of live events. He was going to do more homelessness coverage, like I said, but then what everybody wanted was COVID news. So he pivoted to create an email newsletter. He also engaged a high school friend who also worked in journalism, and they started putting out a newsletter once a week that had a roundup of all the fact-checked COVID news that was locally relevant and locally specific. And then we had some other things happen. We had the Proud Boys came and marched through the streets in Kalamazoo. There was a whole kind of violent conflict between protesters and the police, and they decided to cover that. And so that made its way into the newsletter, and that got people a little more interested. I got involved in 2021. I met the creator of Now Kalamazoo, and we started collaborating. We decided to start working together, and that's when we thought, nonprofit is probably the way forward. That seems to be the way the wind is blowing in terms of funding that's available for startup news organizations. And so that's what we did. In 2023, we actually incorporated the Local Journalism Foundation. We applied for and got IRS approval as a nonprofit organization. And so over the last 3 years since our formation as a nonprofit, we have definitely benefited from what I'll call philanthropic capital. And that means both grants that we have applied for, gifts that we have been given from foundations and things like that. But if you're interested in starting a news organization, there is a lot out there. I could name, the Tiny News Collective, Lion Publishers, the Institute for Nonprofit News, known as INN, Press Forward. So there is a lot going on in terms of organizations and funding aimed at trying to rebuild the local news ecosystem. And
Great.
we have tried to capitalize on everything that's available there.
Okay, Reid, Ron, I'm gonna in the because of the time constraint, I'm gonna ask you the last question, and I want one key point from each one of you. Let's start with Reid. Okay, same question, and this is from Varney. What's one really effective way to use AI as a journalist? I know we can spend another hour talking about this really important issue that I'm sure everybody cares about. But again, because of the time constraint, I'm gonna give each one of you 30 seconds to share with us one practical way that you think would be an effective usage of AI as a journalist. Reid, I'm gonna start with you and
Yeah,
then after.
I'll go first. I use AI every day. I used to run a development team I had a team of 10 people, designers and software developers, and we used to build all kinds of both internal and external software tools and applications when I was at Gannett. I don't have the resources to have that kind of team anymore, except a $20 a month subscription kind of gets me the equivalent of a team of five, I feel like. So I am using it to build tools because there just isn't a lot of stuff that exists for email first publishers. Everything's oriented toward web publishers in the world. So I think that's a wonderful and valuable use of the technology.
Wonderful. Ron,
I
how
just
about
want to
you?
say that I know it's very difficult to think about a whole new approach to journalism. But I'm thinking about the stories of the Wright brothers and Henry Ford and those who came up with something totally new that took time. It's
Mhm.
going to take time. I don't have a product to sell. I just want to make sure, particularly younger people, are going to be engaging with important information beyond just the social media entertainment. And that was the motivation. So I just hope it'll take time, but hopefully it'll come.
Terrific. Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Reid, so much for this, you know, absolutely, insightful webinar. I'm sure our audience enjoyed it as much as I just did. Thank you both. And if you could please take a moment to drop your, which I think Ron just did, your email address, read into the chat box. I encourage all of our new friends to reach out to you if they have more specific questions or if they simply want to collaborate further with you. Uh, all right. Thank you all. Please on the lookout for our announcement for our next webinar, roughly 4 weeks from now. And stay tuned. We have a lot of excellent content, which will continue to capture your attention. All right.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Stay safe, especially for folks who are living, middle or and the East Coast because of the wildfire. Our neighbor passes on to us. And we hope to see you all soon. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bobby.
Thank you,
See you
Bobby.
around.
Thank you,
Thank
Reed.
you.